welcome to the Sidewalk CEO Podcast, a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Each week, the Sidewalk CEO speaks with Frankfort area business owners about their journeys, sharing insights and firsthand experiences that can help fuel your path to success. Here are your hosts, Sherry Donahue, CEO and Chief Cybersecurity Evangelist of Commonwealth Sentinel Cybersecurity, and Leo Haggerty, founder of TCHQ Communications.
Welcome to the Sidewalk CEO. I'm Leo Haggerty from TCHQ Communications, along with
Sherry Donahue from Commonwealth Sentinel Cybersecurity.
Sherry, we have made it to episode number 4. Congratulations.
No, you too. Almost a month here, so this is exciting. Yeah. We're on a roll, and we've had some great guests.
We have, and I'm excited for today's guest. We have Harry Carver from Bluegrass Realty and Investments. Harry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, before we get into talking about real estate and what all you do, why don't you give us a little bit about your background and let folks know who Harry is.
Who is Harry? I've been here in Frankfort for about 27 years now. I came for a 10-month gig and then never left. I think that I discovered that, in that 10 months that Frankfort was a great place to live and decided that this is where I was going to stay. So I think all of you folks out there that have, don't realize from the outside looking in what we have, take another look.
So I've been in Kentucky almost as long as you've been in Frankfort. It'll be 27 years this September. And the first decade or so, we lived in Middlesboro. And I always said to my wife, if we move and we stay in Kentucky, I want to come to Frankfort. It's right in the middle of everything. You've got a small town feel, but there's pretty much nothing in the world that you could want that you can't get to within an hour. So.
Yeah, I find it interesting when people say that, that they're bored, and I think, well, it's your own fault. Because there's plenty of things going on here that to keep folks busy and entertained. I think it's it's just a matter of opening your eyes and finding it. It's a mistake to think that for a town our size that we don't have a lot going on, a lot of opportunities available for folks.
So how long have you been working in real estate?
About 9 years this time.
So before
I had my real estate license and back in the aughts, I guess you would say, for several years, and put my license up for when I went back to work for state government for a period. And then after that period ended, I got it back out and then decided that I was encouraged to get my appraiser's license and went ahead and did that. And so I do both. I do both real estate sales and residential appraisals.
So you're an agent with Bluegrass Realty and Investments. You don't own it, but you're also kind of your own business onto yourself.
Right. I think, when you all asked me about doing this podcast, I was like, well, I'm not my own, I'm not a business. And then I thought, well, yeah, I am, because, I'm self-employed. I have to, I take care of all my own paperwork and everything. Any agent, any realtor that you deal with, they can't operate on their own. They have to be attached to a broker. And so that's, how we operate. But they just, they pay us as an independent contractor. So I was fortunate enough, Joe Johnson, who's the broker at Bluegrass Realty, is my brother-in-law. And he has been in the business for a number of years. And so we have a nice, small, local firm.
And, you sold me my house.
That's what I did. Many years ago.
Yeah.
I guess that was the first iteration we did.
I don't know if I ever told you this, but I looked it up on the PVA's website a couple of years ago. Other than the folks who built the house in 1940, the Judys, Robin and I have now lived in that house longer than anybody else.
Wow. Congratulations.
Everybody else, it's 3-4 years and then
turn it over.
Yeah. Is that common with Frankfort Realty that people turn over so quickly?
It depends, the neighborhood, the size. Usually the what you would call a starter home, that folks, generally those will turn over more than, a little bit larger homes. But there's no hard and fast rule.
See it as a result of government that as different administrations come and go, that you see a higher influx?
I think that probably was the case, maybe years ago. You don't really see it that much. There's not like a wholesale coming and going in real estate, between administrations. So obviously there's some of it, but.
So what would you say some of the biggest changes in the real estate market have been since you started?
Well, the most interesting thing that's happened with this court decision last year, and it was all about agents being able to, advertise what they were paying the buyer's agent, the commission that was going to be paid the buyer's agent. There was a court ruling, and I'm not going to say it because I'll forget what state it is, and I don't want to say the wrong one, but it reverberated nationally, and that there was a settlement with the National Association of Realtors. So now, instead of, where, you might be quoted, if you're going to list your house, you might be, quoted a, 5%, 6%, commission that you would have to pay to sell your house. Now and when your agent would list it, they would say it would be 2.5% or 3% to the buyer's agent. We can't advertise that now. It has to be a negotiated thing. And you have to have, as an agent, before you can show a house now, you have to have a signed agreement with that buyer and what they've agreed to compensate you for. Now, where that money comes from is a whole different story. But it's busted up into pieces now, and it's not as transparent.
Okay. In terms of how the market has changed in Frankfort, what have you seen?
In the past, I guess year or so, let's start to lose track of time. Where we had a couple of years ago with low interest rates and limited inventory. I mean, stuff just didn't stay on the market. It came on the market and it was gone in a day. There was the days of multiple offers, and now there's not a ton of inventory. I think there's about a little over 100 houses on the market right now in Frankfort. They just tend to stay on the market a little bit longer. And, generally the, what we would call, the starter homes, tend to move faster, the more affordable price range moves faster. And the definition of affordable has been a moving target over the past few years, whereas, it wasn't that many years ago when we would talk about a starter home, at 100,000, 125,000, and now we're talking about starter homes at 200,000. So it's, a little bit different game.
Well, and I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Frankfort, like a lot of communities since COVID, has seen a lot. It's the same houses we're talking about. It's just they're worth more today than they were 10 years ago.
And, and we have not had a lot of, new construction. In Frankfort, there were a number of subdivisions that were platted out and approved, I guess, prior to the housing bust in the 2008. And they had, sat for the most part vacant, but now they have been, built out, and we really don't have a lot of, we don't have a lot, there are not approved subdivisions out there. So there's not a lot of construction, or it's not near the construction that we need to keep up with the demand.
So before we keep going into some more into the real estate market and how all of that works, you've also been very involved in the community, particularly with downtown. Specifically with the downtown Frankfort.
Yes, I was, and I will admit, my time in state government, I was a non-merit employee. So as most people realize, when you're a non-merit employee, you don't always survive administrations. So at one point, I was had been involved as a volunteer with downtown Frankfort, and ended up being the director for several years. It was like 2006, 2007 in that time, right? And I've been involved as a volunteer since. I think it's important, that downtown is the heart of a community. I mean, if you don't have a vibrant downtown, if folks aren't, hanging out on the street and, doing things downtown, then a community lacks its viability. I mean, big companies don't make decisions to locate in towns because they have a Walmart on the interstate. It's because they have a vibrant downtown.
So as part of downtown Frankfort, what were you seeing, or even now, as the environment for small businesses to start?
I think it's changed dramatically. I mean, we have, the downtown has benefited greatly from, the increased numbers in tourists. particularly with the bourbon tourism happening now. I mean, I live downtown, and you walk down the street or you go in the coffee shop and you realize you don't know anybody there, which is a good thing, that we have that many folks coming into town and spending money here. So, that's kind of exciting. So that's created an opportunity for more businesses downtown. We've had in the past couple of years, and you might want to have Susie Hosley with Downtown Frankfort come talk sometime, because talk about what it's like for retail downtown, because I know we've struggled for a long time. We've had restaurants, we've had bars, and we've had the anchors, if you will, in retail of Completely Kentucky and Poor Richards. But beyond that, the retail part of downtown has come and gone.
But in the last 2-3 years or so, it seems to be really bouncing back.
It is, absolutely. It absolutely has. And I think that the additional traffic downtown obviously has helped that a lot.
I think that with the 2 new hotels that are opened up and the plans to redo the Capitol Plaza will only help to keep those growing.
And also, once we get more folks, once the vacant parcels downtown are developed, then when we have more people living downtown, that I think that will help as well.
So as a real estate agent, do you have a lot of properties downtown that you're marketing, or?
Not right now. I think that, we have a lot, there's a lot of interest, and this is kind of a double-edged sword. There's a lot of interest in downtown and South Frankfort, because, folks want to, live down there. They want to be able to walk. Walking is a little bit more difficult now with the Singing Bridge closed, but we won't talk about that. But it also, the double-edged sword part of that is that there's a lot of interest from outside in buying for short-term rentals, and which has created a little bit of angst amongst folks. We already have an affordable housing crisis, if you will, here, as we do across the country. And, with limited inventory out there, then that makes it more, more difficult, because you're competing with other people, for housing, and you're competing with people that aren't going to live in the house. I think the city took steps to rectify this by limiting by neighborhood the number of short-term rentals that could be in those neighborhoods. But
well, let me ask you this. So you, I guess, put your real estate license on hold and went to work for state government. And then after that stint, you came back. How do you see that, the difference in being a government employee versus being, your own?
My own.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say that. And I thought about this a minute yesterday when after I talked to you all. I think state government's a very interesting thing, and it's a very interesting thing that dominates this town, because we're not a large community to have that large, that big an employer, and I find if you read, if you can stand to read Facebook comments and without pulling your hair out, things like that, it's very different when you're working for, a governmental entity, or if you're working for yourself. I mean, and how you view the world is different, and how you view how other people behave is different. And because I'll see people comment, well, why doesn't that business do this, or why don't they do that? And, and it's like, well, probably because they can't afford to. But, if you haven't been in that situation, it's harder to understand. And, and I admire people that are entrepreneurs, it's jumping off the edge. There's no guarantees there or anything, and it's a very different world.
So if somebody was a state worker who's looking for a side hustle, or just maybe retiree, or just somebody who's looking at starting something on their own, where they would be like a sole proprietor or a gig employee, the way you would probably be considered, what advice would you have for them?
That's hard. I think that one of the things that makes it difficult, and this is getting a little bit more beyond Frankfort thing, is that the ability of folks to get affordable health insurance is a big problem for people when they want to start their own business. And I know that, I've talked to a number of folks that said, if my spouse hadn't been a school teacher or hadn't been a government employee, I wouldn't have been able to do this because we wouldn't have been able to afford health insurance. So I think that's a big, it's got to be a big determinant when people, take that leap to start their own business. So it's and can you, realistically, have you put forth a business plan that survives? I'm not, by any means an expert on this or know enough about it to really talk about it. But and that's why it's kind of interesting too that Frankfort, because it's with state government, that folks have the opportunity to retire at a fairly young age and start a new career. That, you do see some businesses that are those folks, and because that takes that worry off the table of, having to worry about their health insurance, that, and I would think we would see more of that though. And maybe, maybe they're in types of businesses where they're not as obvious what they're doing or, not as, out front. But I think that's
one of the first things I noticed when I came to Frankfort was it's not strange for somebody not to have a 502 area code, because people have come from all over the state and sometimes all over the country to work for state government, and they either still are or they aren't, but they've kept the number. And of course, cell phones have made long distance kind of obsolete, but it was just, I remember the first time I went into dry cleaner. And she asked for my number, and I'm like, oh, she's going to worry that I'm not going to come because I've got a 606 number. And I commented about it, and she's like, no, mine's 270. So it's like, most people don't have those numbers. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden, we've got to the point where we, it's whatever, 10 numbers and you're used to it.
As long as it's not 888, I guess, right?
So, obviously, for sale signs are one way that the real estate business markets properties. How has that changed, and how do you see most of your listings and sales coming to you now?
Well, the whole internet thing, if you will, has evolved over time. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, the amount of exposure you get is certainly different. I mean, you talk about back in the day when the multiple listings, when an agent had to look at a hard copy book and see what was listed, as opposed to being able to, go online and see. And the same thing with, with folks that are searching, that they can narrow their focus down before they even, call an agent if they haven't started working with one. The other thing is when we list a house, it when it goes live on our Bluegrass Realtors MLS, then that feeds out to all the other, to Zillow, to Trulia, to all of them that, so it just, Realtor.com, all those things pull from, the MLS. So that, clearly, broadens,
So has that made things harder or easier? I mean, I guess it seems like you would have more well-informed customers, but then again, sometimes more information is not good. Just ask doctors who have patients who decided to consult Dr. Google first.
Yeah, I had a doctor one time. He told me, he goes, stay off the internet.
I think that the Zillow and those services that are great in helping folks perhaps find places, sometimes they give people unrealistic expectations about the value of their home, because a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, my house is worth this because Zillow says it is. And it's a lot more accurate when the house is in a larger subdivision with a lot of comparable sales of similar houses. It becomes more difficult in places like Frankfort where there's not that many sales of similar houses at any given point. So.
Are you using any AI in your real estate business?
Me personally, no. I know that others are. I have not so far. We've played with it a little bit, like looking at statistical stuff and asking questions like that, but I haven't really, delved into it. It's funny. It's just like the whole, social media thing. I'm at the I'm nearing the end of my career. If I were just starting out and, this whole business, my daughter-in-law is an agent in Nashville, and, the what she has to do to maintain a social media presence is, it just wears me out thinking about it, and I know that that's what people, younger folks coming into the business, that's what they have to do to be successful.
Did you make the conscious decision to become an appraiser as well because of a lot of these changes, or what was the impetus?
I thought it would be, I am not a natural salesperson. It's not, something I'm not, I'm not going to be one that I've taken jobs, without paying a lot of attention back in the day when I was younger. And all of a sudden I realized I would have, had to be on the phone all day cold calling. And I was, after a little while, it was just like, no, this is not me. This is not, something I, care to do or I'm comfortable with. So
I think that was one of the things that I liked about working with you, though. I never felt like you were selling me. It's like, here it is. Do you like it? No. Okay. Well, let's go look at another one then.
Well, and that's funny because what I find is people that when I start talking to somebody that's looking for a house, they'll tell me one thing, and invariably what we end up with is very different than the initial conversation that we had. I think it's after you show somebody a couple houses and you watch their facial expression, you get a much better sense of what it is that they're looking for and what it is they'll tolerate in terms of condition.
Well, and it's not that people are lying to you. They just don't know. Yeah.
No, they don't know yet. So it's that part of it's always, amusing to me as, as we move through the process.
Right.
But then I've had people that have bought the first house I've shown them, which just scared me. I was like, are you sure? I want to talk about it, but I'm like, are you sure? Is it the first one you saw? You really want to do? So, it's just a different, people are different.
They're the ones that go on a blind date and propose the same night.
Right. Which would not be me. Yeah. But on the appraisal side of it, I find it very interesting. It's, to see what perhaps your gut reaction is to a house. And then after you do all the, you do all the work and do the, put the comps together and, adjust everything, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. So it's an interesting exercise. I enjoy it.
Okay.
So let's go back to Airbnb for a second. If somebody was thinking about doing that, what should they be looking for in a property? What would be the...
I think, it's interesting because and I don't know, and I've had several people tell me this, but apparently there's some national something that has produced a paper, if you will, an article, I don't know what they did, a ranking that showed that somehow Frankfort in this area, the affordability combined with the demand for, with the tourism and all, it makes it a perfect match. So I think it's increased, the demand here for, short-term rentals, the folks that want to, invest. I think that I don't know that much about it other than, it's quite an intensive thing. And I think that, that people need to go into it with their eyes open. Now, there are companies, and this is the other part of it, there are companies that will manage it soup to nuts. All you do is buy the place and turn it over to them or do whatever they suggest you do to it and then turn it over to them. That way, you're not washing sheets every day. You're not trying to clean something out. There's a whole, army of people out there doing that kind of work. But the other thing that's interesting to me about the short-term rental business is that they really, you can see, obviously in my neighborhood, I know which ones are, Airbnbs and, who lives where. And it's interesting to see the ones that are consistently full and the ones that aren't. And, that a bad review or a series of bad reviews can, be very damaging to, a property. So people have to be prepared to maintain it and be prepared to react and also to, make sure that it's maintained and, so.
Okay. So it is work. If folks are thinking about doing, there's work involved.
And, and you, as well as I do, you go drive over the Capitol Avenue Bridge. I always laugh. You see these groups of people walking from South Frankfort over downtown and, you know that they're here, visiting and, so it's good.
So as a real estate agent, when you're selling a property that somebody's looking to turn into an Airbnb or a rental property as an investment, something like that. Do you see a lot of pushback from the neighborhood that people don't want a lot of, in and out type?
I think that because the city had concentrated the Airbnbs in two neighborhoods, that I think there was, that you saw much more of that pushback. You don't hear as much about it, in the county as you do, in those neighborhoods, downtown and in South Frankfort. I think that because in the county, in both places, both the city and the county, you can have in those neighborhoods in the city as well as any residential neighborhood in the county, you can have a short-term rental with a conditional use permit. If you meet all the criteria, you get a conditional use permit. Now, granted, it has to go in the county before the Board of Zoning Adjustments. In the city, in the two neighborhoods in the city, it would go before the Architectural Review Board, which acts as the BZA for the historic districts. But really, if you meet all the criteria, it's very difficult for the Board of Zoning Adjustments to turn you down. They would have to have,
When I bought my house, I live in Louisville, and so I bought it in 95. I was like 4 years old. And the person had passed away, so it was an estate. And the first day it went on the market, we ended up offering a little bit more than they were asking because they told us there were a lot of offers on the house. And there were several businesses that had offered cash because they wanted to make it a rental property. And I was shocked when the agent ended up, she said, no, you're getting the house. I'm like, okay, how come we got it when, these other people were offering cash? And she said, because the neighbors were tired of it being empty. It had been empty for like a year, because they had to go through cleaning it out and all of this. And they said the neighbors asked us, please don't sell it to somebody who's going to make it a rental property, or there's going to be a lot of people coming and going. And they said, they asked us to sell it to somebody that will plan to be here for a long time. And like I said, that was 95. And, so it's been 30 years I've been in the same house. So they chose wisely. But so I was kind of in, okay. So I was interesting that the neighborhood kind of pushed the realtors on how they chose, Well,
but if it was an estate, mm-hmm. and the heirs were conscious of the neighbor's wishes and chose to do that. Most people selling their house are in a position where they need to maximize the amount of money they get out of it, and they're going to go. Unless, the best offer for them, so that, then that's generally, what's going to happen. No, and I have seen cases, though, where people are very clear about, I really don't want my house to be sold for a short-term rental, and that's kind of hard to,
Yeah. Once you sign the paper, they can do whatever they want with it.
So you don't hear as much about this as you did 5-10 years ago, but is flipping still a common way for people to get into the market, or have prices in Frankfort just gotten so high that flipping's not practical?
No, it's just a matter of being able to find the right property to flip, and what, between the right property, meaning, the price of it, how much needs to be done, and your skill level.
And materials are so expensive right now. We're in the process of building a garage. When I say we, I mean my dad. But
because Sherry is still 15.
Yes, I am. But that's what he was like. Okay, we got to go ahead and get the lumber package now because the prices are going up, and they're already pretty high as it is. So
and that's unfortunately with all the folks now that have been impacted by the flood this spring.
Mm-hmm, sure.
That, they're facing that. That the materials are more expensive. There's the contractors around town are they're busy. There's a lot of work to be done. It's going to be a problem. Plus, the flood took housing
off the market.
Out of the so folks that are folks that own properties that were impacted that were not inhabitable have had to rent places. So that's taking, those, folks in, in rental properties that were flooded, depending on what the landlord intends to do, a lot of them are in limbo and have had to find, other places. Well, it's created a lot of issues for folks to,
And that's not a short-term problem. I mean, this is going to take years to resolve.
Yeah, because we and I do, in one of my other hats here, I chair the Franklin County Community Fund, and which is an endowment that we've been working on for about 10 years. In a community fund with the endowment, we can only use money, that's off the principal. It's a permanent endowment, and to make grants with. And also, after the flood, we created a flood relief fund aside from the endowment, so folks could give directly to it. So that's money in, money out to help, folks that were impacted by the flood. And it's just, it's really. It's kind of overwhelming because we realized from the beginning it's not an overnight thing, and there's just phases to what happens after a flood. And the first part, obviously your priority is keeping people sheltered and making sure they're fed and they have clothing if they lost things. Then now we're in that we're in the phase where we're moving towards the rehabilitation part of it, and a lot of people are already back in their houses. Some people aren't, and so there's different phases, different states, and there's different needs, whether you're a renter and you lost all your belongings, or, you're a landlord and the belongings, that's not your problem, but your problem is getting that house back in shape for, the tenants. And so it's a lot of work. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And fortunately, the community has come together, and there's, have had a lot of cooperation, and it's been a good exercise for bringing people, together for a certain task. It's also, pointed out where some of our, gaps in our safety net perhaps are, but, I think in the end we'll be stronger for it.
And I think going back to kind of where we started talking about Frankfort as a community, just from what I've seen, and the businesses we've talked to on the podcast, it's just like everybody has come together to help each other, and it's phenomenal to see that. And I think that's a real testament to Frankfort as a community.
Yeah, it has been. We had people, I was one of those folks that was flooded. And we just had people wander down the street to help. There were folks that came down. We had a gentleman that he took time off work and spent, days, helping everybody muck out there, get all the muddy stuff out of the basement, and it was just, it was very, gratifying that people would take the time to do that for, people they didn't even know.
Right. That's awesome.
So let's look back to real estate real quick before we wrap things up. If somebody was thinking about getting into real estate, what do they need to know?
That it is, it's not an instant paycheck. I mean, you have to work a minute to build your business. You may luck out. You may have a broad enough circle of people that are going to be looking for houses or selling houses in the next little bit. But generally, it's going to take a little while to build your business and to be able to survive from one commission to the next.
And a lot of people do not survive very long.
I don't know. I should have looked up the rate at which people drop out of the business. And I know, and I should say, when I went back to work, for the state, it was at the time when, the housing crash back in 2008. And there were a lot of agents falling out, back then, that were just...
Now, do a lot of people become real estate agents as a side hustle, if you will?
Yeah, there's a fair number. Okay. Yeah, a lot.
I've got a client who's a real estate agent out of Louisville, and he was telling me when he first got started, he's a retired teacher. This is his second career, and he started at the same time with this young lady, late 20s, and she sold $8 million in the first 6 months. And he turned to her and said, "How did you do it?" It's like, "Well, all my friends are buying houses now." And she was out of the business in another year because in that first 6 months, she'd sold to everybody she knew and she didn't know anybody else. and she didn't want to do the work. She thought it was as easy as calling all your friends and selling them a house.
Well, like me, I'm a real estate agent's worst nightmare. I've got my house up in there 30 years, right? I mean, my parents have been in their house 58 years, right? So
yeah. No, I'm with you. No, and there's appealing things about it. I mean, for people, and I understand why people, the flexibility generally, that sort of thing. Now, if you don't want to get called at odd hours and have to, then it's probably not for you. I have to laugh. I said that, if I list a house, then it will guarantee that I'll sell it if I go on vacation. And, because
now there's a job for me.
Yeah.
Go on vacation to make money. I like that.
Invariably, as soon as I go on vacation, there'll be, some
let me ask
negotiations
you,
will begin.
This is, I know and I guess I just haven't paid much attention to real estate recently, but do they still do like the Sunday afternoon open houses, or because of people being online now, do they not?
They're not, people don't do them as much. I don't think that, I don't want to speak for everybody, but what I hear people say is, yeah, they're good. I might pick up a new client, but I don't sell the house that way. Mm.
That's just the nosy neighbors coming to see.
There'll be a lot of neighbors will walk through. But yeah, you're right. Because people do see, everything online, they're not as, I don't think it's quite as prevalent.
So you get your Sundays back. I always thought, I feel so sorry for real estate agents. Their Sundays
we still do them. And, in a lot of times it's, the client would really like, has a very strong feeling about one happening. So, we'll do that.
Okay.
Do they still bake cookies?
Some do, some don't.
Okay. Harry, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Harry Carver is with Bluegrass Realty and Investments. We will have links and contact information in the show notes. We'll also have information about DFI and the Community Fund.
Great.
If folks want to learn more about that. All right. So that is going to do it for this episode. Sherry, nice work.
Thank you. I tell you what, I'm very impressed with every episode that we've had so far. People from all different businesses talking about the flood and the impact on them and all that. So this is definitely a Frankfort area podcast.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye.
You have been listening to the Sidewalk CEO podcast with Sherry Donahue of Commonwealth Sentinel Cybersecurity and Leo Haggerty of TCHQ Communications. You can learn more about the Sidewalk CEO on the web at thesidewalkceo.com and on social media. The Sidewalk CEO is recorded in the studios of TCHQ Communications in Frankfort, Kentucky. Check us out next week for the next episode of the Sidewalk CEO.